America. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By honoring your sacred vocation of nursing, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. At Grand Canyon University, our online RN to BSN, MSN, or DNP degree programs allow you to balance online coursework with local in-person clinical, practicum, or immersion hours. Find your purpose at GCU. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is sponsored by Codify, a California benefit corporation. Visit Codify at www.codifi.com.
Ancient tools and burials, plants and seeds, Neanderthals. All these things we make no apology are the study.
Welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast, episode 63. Today we're joined by returning guest Nicholas Bellantoni, retired state archaeologist from the state of Connecticut. He's here to tell us about the mysterious site that some intrepid hoaxers had put together just for him. Why did they do it? What was the purpose behind it? And how was Nick able to use the archaeological method to figure out that this site was indeed a hoax?
We are a staple of archaeology.
Get ready to think critically.
But we don't do dinosaurs.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I am here today with my co-host, Ken Fader. How's it going?
It's going great, Sarah. How about you? I mean, we're looking at the middle of November. It was 61 degrees today here in Connecticut, so I'm not going to complain.
It was nice today, yeah. The weather's finally starting to turn fallish. But we have a returning guest with us today. We have Nicholas Bellantoni back with us today, and he is going to tell us about his experience with the Pachuag State Forest Archaeological Hoax. Nick, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me back, Sarah. And
thanks
Ken,
for coming back.
Doing?
I'm good. Nick and I have known each other, I think it's since the Middle Woodland period, Nick, isn't it? I think it's about that long. But the funny thing is, Nick was you were like an undergraduate at Central.
That's right.
When you got your degree there and went on to UConn, where I was a grad student, we went on to grad school there. I left UConn and came to Central as an instructor. So we kind of passed in the night, but we knew each other from before that, working with Fred Warner and the Connecticut Archaeological Survey. So Nick and I go way back. Nick how many years were you the state archaeologist of Connecticut, Nick?
27 officially. So
so that's
from the late 80s till 2 years ago.
And I actually served, Sarah, on the search committee that hired Nick. So
That's
I
right.
still get a check every couple of months from Nick for putting him in that position. Nick was absolutely fantastic. I mean, he was really amazing. He is an amazing public speaker. And maybe, Nick, at some point today you can tell us about the books you're working on, I guess, for Wesleyan University Press, on your experiences as a state archaeologist. That's really great stuff, and maybe we'll have you back on the podcast down the line, because they're interesting stories.
Well, we'd love to. Absolutely. Yeah. Enjoy being with you and Sarah.
Oh,
yeah,
thanks.
It's great.
Well, so we've had Nicholas on the show before because he told us about the New England vampires.
Yeah, which was a really cool story.
It was.
And
today,
just finished with Halloween, so it's been really much in demand lately, let me tell you.
Well, and I reran it as one of our Halloween special episodes this year, so it was pretty popular, actually. Got a lot of retweets. And that means good things for people who don't speak tech. But today, you're going to tell us about this Pachuag State Forest Archaeological Hoax, which apparently was tailor-made just for you by some lunatic fan.
You must feel really special about that. But we've talked about, let me just very briefly, we've talked about archaeological hoaxes on the podcast before. I mean, and all the usual suspects, Nick. We've done an episode on the Cardiff Giant, one on the Piltdown. We had Brad Lepper and what's his name?
Jeff Gill. Jeff Gill.
Yeah, Jeff Gill, talking about the Newark Holy Stones, these stones in Ohio with Hebrew writing on them. We devoted another episode, I think, I talked about, because I saw the Heavener Runestone, the Kensington Runestone, and so we've talked about those, and they tend to be kind of, they're in the past, they're 19th century, they're not excavated by professional archaeologists, somebody finds something, and it's a couple of pieces, and there's a very little archaeological context. It's extremely rare I mean, I don't know how many other examples we have, and Pilton, I guess, is one of them, where there's an actual claimed site where these things are being recovered in kind of real time, and not just simply, oh, we found this last week, aren't these things cool? But that's what happened in this case. Nick, can you just give us some background? How were you alerted to this site in the first place? And is it totally fake, or is there a real component here?
Yeah, well, it all started back in the late 90s. And, as state archaeologists, you make contacts all over Connecticut. People that have, interest in archaeology or Native American history or colonial history. And so there were a couple of individuals from Eastern Connecticut who had approached me a number of times. I got to know them over the years and came to me saying that they had found a rock shelter in Pachuag State Forest in the eastern part of the state, and they thought that it might be a very significant site, and would I consider excavating it? And at first I wasn't quite, concerned about it. I mean, because it was on state land, the site's protected, and but they kept coming back to me about it, and the kind of a mystique about this site started to grow, and so I kind of got concerned that, well, maybe somebody might go out and vandalize this thing. And so I arranged to go out there and take a look at it. And sure enough, there's a legitimate rock shelter, a ledge, outcropping of bedrock with a small ledge, not too large, but enough where the small group of people could get under it. I decided, maybe I should pay attention to this and do something here just to, be sure it isn't vandalized. So, and it is, I should tell you, it's way out in the wooded area. Pachuag Forest is an extremely large forest in eastern Connecticut, and it was over a mile from the road that we were able to park our vehicles. So it's pretty obscured. So we went out there. We developed a research strategy. I had some students and volunteers that assisted me, and we went out and set up a grid and started to excavate under and outside the immediate ledge. And sure enough, we found everything from, 19th century bottles on the surface to Native American artifacts underneath, including a number of projectile points and, debitage and so forth. Based on the points, it looked like we had something that probably dated around the late Archaic period, 3,000 or so years ago. Nothing, no features to radiocarbon date or anything, but we continued to excavate.
And Nick, this was all kind of standard stuff, the kind of stuff you'd expect up in Connecticut. Nothing that set off a signal in your head that something was amiss.
No, that's right. And what really set the signal off was a day I returned to the site. I don't know if it was after a weekend or a day that I had another obligation. And so we had missed at least a day, came back to the site, and some of the people there were all excited. It turns out they had done a test pit along a rock wall outside of the area we had set our grid on. They did a test pit and found a clay aboriginal pipe, just a bowl. It had a trumpet head to it, kind of more Iroquoian style clay pipe than we normally see here in New England, especially Eastern Connecticut. And so the first thing I said was like, well, who told you to dig here? We were working another area of the site. Well, we wanted to come to this area. We thought there might be something, and while you were gone, we did a test pit. So I went and looked at where they'd done the test pit, and I decided, I saw the pipe, and the pipe was pretty impressive. It had no tobacco residual in the bowl, but it clearly was Aboriginal. And I decided, well, maybe we need to do some work in this area. So I continued my grid to that area and started a full-scale excavation of some of the units. By the way, we did a thermoluminescent date on that pipe. We got actually two dates back. One dated to 1,300 years ago. The other dated to over 900 years ago. So the average date was about like 1,100 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it seemed to have some antiquity to it. Mm-hmm. So we excavated, and we in one of the areas adjacent to where the original test pit was, we came down on some quartz cobbles, about the size of your fist, and thought that was interesting. We know Native Americans utilize quartz in terms of making flake tools and so forth. So I thought this was a good start. And underneath the cobbles, as we extended deeper into the excavation, we found some sheet copper rolled as a bead. And we also found a small little pendant, a stone. The stone couldn't have been over an inch in length, but it had a hole drilled through it. I thought that quite amazing. Something I wasn't expecting.
It's very, very rare to find copper in Canada.
Rarely.
Yeah, because remember, like all of the Bronze Age people from Overland took all the copper away from America.
Right.
So there's none to be found over here anyway at that time period. Sorry.
But the native copper is all from Michigan?
Yeah.
It's fairly. You commonly find it in Ohio and in the Midwest. It's traded extensively.
Right.
But in Connecticut, it's extremely. We find that stuff very infrequently.
And how large was the bead?
Oh no, the bead was the initial bead I found couldn't have been maybe an inch in length. Rolled
copper.
Now it wasn't drilled. It was simply a copper sheet that had a bead form. And the thing that hit me right off the bat was the corrosion, and that is usually when we see ancient copper that is corroded, it usually has a hard crusted kind of a dark green texture.
Right. Yeah.
This thing was a pale green, like a paste, and the copper itself had an orange coloration to it. So very, very nothing I had seen or was familiar with. As we continued the excavation, we found a turtle effigy pipe. This was so cool. It was, probably about 4 inches in length. The bowl was on the back of the turtle's shell. There was a stem coming through it, or a bore, I should say, coming out the back. And it was just an amazing artifact. And, and Ken, you know this from all of your work, that when archaeologists find something totally unusual, the antenna has to start coming up.
This is what Nick has just described. You just don't find that.
No.
In Connecticut, in Ohio, in the Midwest, there are these beautiful effigy pipes of various animals. Those are not very common, but they are found. There are lots of them in that area. But in Connecticut, this is unheard of.
This is absolutely total again. And so, like I said, when I see something I've never seen before in a context I've never seen before, everybody around me, everybody at the dig was just, they were going, hip, hip, hooray. And everybody was just so excited. And, I just shook my head and I said, something's just not right. And what we did, by the way, we continued to excavate. We found there was charcoal associated within this feature, and we would eventually have the charcoal radiocarbon dated, and it came out to over 3,000 years ago. About the late Archaic period, and a transition toward the woodland, and so we had some legitimate charcoal, had some, a pipe that, with a TL date had some antiquity to it. But I noticed there were problems in the field. So, for example, the soils within the feature were in the subsoil, the B horizon. And there was, other than the charcoal, there was not a lot of organic. You could actually there was actually a lining, but subsoil still in it. And the soil compaction within the feature was very porous. That is to say, if you put your finger in it, you can almost dip down to one knuckle. So it was airy, and that suggested to me that it might be very recent rather than over 1,000 or 3,000 years old. And I noticed also while I was excavating, there were roots surrounding the feature. But in the feature itself, there were no root systems. And so I started to question, how could root systems avoid a feature like this?
It's very bizarre. Very bizarre.
The reason that, just in case people don't know, the reason that's bizarre is because feature dirt tends to be softer than the surrounding dirt, which makes it easier for the roots to get through it, which makes it ideal for root systems. So this absence, this void of root systems within a feature is incredibly unusual.
Yeah,
and it can't be explained by the presence of the copper. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense.
No, because it's just a tiny little bead.
Right.
When I proposed this in the field, that was suggested that maybe the copper was, but you know what? There wasn't enough copper, and copper, as far as I understand, cannot. If this thing was laid down 3,000 years ago, or even 1,000 years ago, subsequent root development is going to invade.
Absolutely right.
I don't know how that cannot happen, and so. Again, my suspicions that something was just not right, and something was rotten in Denmark here. And at this time, I should tell you, we started to uncover other features in adjacent units, and they came up with whale effigy pendants.
This is
a snake that was just a double coiled snake around a helmeted individual, a male. These were the most amazing artifacts I had ever excavated.
Yeah, you just don't find this in Connecticut.
Yeah. And what were they made out of?
They were made out of a form of granite. It wasn't a hard stone. They were very easily hard as granite can be, but some of them were actually soapstone. Which is, Ken will tell you, a soft product that also made from, bowls that were excavated. Kenny has done a number of and but what we would subsequently learn as we did some lab work outside, off the field, is that all of these were carved with the use of modern machinery.
Gotcha.
We were able to do everything from X-ray analysis to other materials to really show that there were a lot of scouring that was done by by modern machine activity. Now, we didn't know this in the field when we were excavating this, but of course there was one feature that, when I excavated, and I started excavating the feature, one of my thoughts was to maybe pedestal this. In the feature lining, I found a leaf, a modern leaf. Now, the leaf had been dead, obviously. It fell off a tree and so forth, but it was still there. And, for a feature that's 3,000 years old in New England, no leaf is going to survive that long.
Right.
What I suspect happened is it was driven down when they used a shovel to place the artifacts in. Anyhow, the other thing I found was, you ever see, you guys ever put on one of those arrow head things where you put it over your head and what arrow comes in one end and comes out the other?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about for Halloween and stuff?
The gag ones.
Well, we found one feature where a root entered, got to the feature lining, and that same root came out the other end with nothing between.
So it had been cut through?
Nice.
It cut the root, and the root was the ends of the two ends of the root. It didn't take much of a rocket scientist to figure out this was really bad.
Nice.
What's really cool, what's really interesting, though, is the fact that you found that leaf in the feature that obviously shows the feature was recent. With the Cardiff Giant, the same thing happened. They found modern vegetation. Obviously, it had been in the ground for months, but it certainly wasn't very old, underneath the body of the Cardiff Giant. Which is one of the things when O.C. Marsh, the paleontologist at Yale University, looked under the giant, he said, there are leaves here, guys. This thing can't have been in the ground for more than several months, maybe a year. So it's funny how exactly the same error that was made in 1869 with the Cardiff Giant was made by whoever was trying to scam you.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I think the perpetrators of this maybe thought I was naive. I don't know what they thought, but they obviously thought if we just dug these artifacts up, that it would verify what they wanted us to believe. And I think they didn't understand how archaeologists really work and, how we, subject our sites to various, test implications, laboratory and field tests that, help us understand it. And I think they just thought they could bury this stuff, find it by having the state archaeologists find it with a group of people around them would verify what they were trying to have us believe.
Well, let's take a quick break,
Sure.
and when we come back, you can fill us in on what you think they were trying to make you believe.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
This podcast is sponsored by Ramp. Are you the decision maker in your company? Consider this. For the first time in decades, there's a better option for a corporate card and spend management platform. Meet Ramp, the only corporate card and spend management system designed to help you spend less money so you can make more. With Ramp, you get full visibility into your company's spending and control who spends what with each vendor. Ramp's software collects and verifies receipts instantly to save your team valuable time. Ramp automates data entry and routine tasks with automated approvals, expense categorization and bill payments, time-consuming tasks. Which means you'll stop wasteful spending and close your books in hours instead of days. Businesses that use Ramp add up to 5% to their bottom line the first year. If you're a decision maker, adding Ramp could be one of the best decisions you've ever made. Get $250 when you join Ramp for free. Just go to ramp.com/easy. Ramp.com/easy. ramp.com/easy.
Cards issued by Sutton Bank and Celtic Bank, members of FDIC. Terms and conditions apply.
And we are back, and we are still talking with Nick Bellantoni. And Ken, you had a question for him?
Yeah. And I just want to step back before you continue, Nick. So when you were out there, these were students of yours and volunteers?
That's right.
Yeah, because I'm sitting there thinking, if, there have been times when I have been directing field work, right? And there have been times when I've had to, walk to the side, back to our cars and talk to a newspaper reporter, or I've had to see another site and then come back. And if I were to return to a site where I'm the field director and students had kind of independently decided to dig a test pit somewhere else, I would pitch a freaking fit. But I'm wondering, how did you react when you came back and these people said, "Oh yeah, by the way, we just took it on ourselves to dig over there"?
No, I was not a happy camper here, and especially when they showed me the artifact that they had found. Already,
it's got to raise your suspicions immediately, right?
With some of the people out there. Now, my volunteers and crew, for the most part, my students and people that came with me, were not the ones that did this test pit.
Okay.
It were people that had drawn us to this site. And there was, I'll tell you, we had other than those that were doing the excavation, there had to be another 15, 20 people sometimes all around us.
Is that right? All right.
They were filming. They were very excited about this whole thing. And, it just had this kind of very peculiar aspect to it right off the beginning. But it wasn't one of my students or crew that did this test pit.
So it was the people that brought you out there in the first place who serendipitously found this artifact while you were off away from the site then.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. In fact, they had been trying to get me to excavate this. And I had, we've got enough work to do under the ledge and outside the ledge because, there was enough work to do there that, and I really, to be honest with you, I didn't see the potential in this area. However, obviously now we were drawn to it and I had to do something.
Right.
At this point.
Right.
But I should make that clear. This was not the work of any of our volunteers or students.
There you go. All right. So you were frustrating the hell out of them by not. Why don't you? Maybe you should dig over there. That would be a good idea.
Not taking the bait.
They figured, well, what the hell?
Yeah.
We'll dig. We'll find it. We'll tell them about it.
Wow.
Yeah, and the word was starting to spread through the grapevine, and so I decided that one of the things I needed to do while we were still in the field was invite members of the Native American community. Members. We had members from the Nipmuc, Mohegan, Pequot tribes come out, along with their staff archaeologists, and to see this site and give me their impressions, and not only what we were finding, but the context in which we were finding it. So that was very helpful, and but I wanted them to know right away because from what I was receiving, that our discoveries were really going through the grapevine really quickly.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Well, that's that.
Yeah.
You're not going to keep a secret in archaeology, despite what the fringe archaeologists say that we keep secrets. We archaeologists talk way too much. Get too excited about stuff.
Well, and especially if you had that many people out there.
Or non-archaeologists too in this case.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So now you're finding this amazing stuff, but clearly you're super suspicious. It's like it's too good to be true. These are not the kinds of things we find here. This is an absolutely unique site. So then, where do you go from there?
Well, it's basically documenting what we were finding in the field. No soil formations were visible above the features. There were no organics in the features. Roots were cut. Leaves, I found a modern oak leaf in the lining. Right. So in my suspicion, I got to tell you what I started to do. We found a series of pendants, very stuck with, a single hole drilled through one end of it. And I started to take those up as they were evidences. And what I mean by that, we using surgical gloves as well as brown paper bags. I brought them to the state police laboratories for fingerprints.
Nice.
Unfortunately, there were no fingerprints, and they basically told me that the reason was that in the ground, moisture seeping through would strip his fingerprints away. But that's how suspicious I was in the field.
Wow.
That's too bad it didn't pan out, because that was pretty clever.
Right off the bat. Well, one of the artifacts, I have to tell you, and I think, Ken, you were alluding to having an X-ray image of this, was about a foot long, maybe not quite, maybe like about 10 or 11 inches long, double serpent wrapped steel-tight pipe. The bore was at least 11 inches, something like that. 20-something seminaries, I can't remember what it was now, but and the bowl. And this was the grandest of all the artifacts. This was just one amazing feature.
It's super impressive. I've seen
And this is all coming out of the one feature.
No, actually there were about 3 or 4 features. Kind of collapsing it, but no, there were 3 or 4 features. In fact, we got radiocarbon dates on 2 of them, and one dated to the late Archaic, another dated less than 1,000 years ago to the late Woodlands. So the radiocarbon dates were all over the place. Right. And yet, stratigraphically, these features were in the same, horizon.
Gotcha.
They very, they look contemporary. They look like, I shouldn't say contemporary. But we were getting these off-the-wall radiocarbon dates. Now, of course, there could be contamination involved, but later on, we would see that. Anyhow, the Mashantucket Pequot Museum agreed to do X-rays of this long pipe, and the X-ray showed, I believe it, if I remember correctly, a 3/16 of an inch bore going complete length. Now, it can't
be perfect 3/16 bore
building techniques. Using a bow drill and so forth.
Right.
They tend to be tapered, and they would come in from both ends. So to be able to drill that length at that precise a diameter,
right,
obviously suggests a mechanical drill. Also, what was kind of interesting about that pipe was it had a little bend to it where the bowl was, and the drill actually doesn't enter into the bowl because it couldn't turn. It went out the side, and they drilled another hole coming back to the bowl.
So it was shoddy workmanship there.
Oh my goodness! It was just,
that's funny.
It was almost comical. But what wasn't comical is that people were taking this seriously, and even though I was very vocal about my issues, there was a group of people that were taking this very, very seriously. So when we got off the field, we did a number of tests that we could do to, one of the things I did is I called all my contacts with the tribes. Not only had I had them in the field, but I asked them to come to Yukon for a presentation, including those individuals that brought me out to the site. And I did a PowerPoint presentation on this site, what we found, why I had issues with it, and I went through all of the problems with it. I forgot to add, I had another one. One of the copper beads that was rolled up, when we looked under a microscope, we could see a fabric or a hair coming out of the center of the board, if you will, the bead, and because it was all packed with this corrosion, and it turned out it was synthetic. It was from probably a paintbrush or something.
Oh wow!
You could
I was
see
just going to say, if it was organic, there is.
Yeah, we put it under a very high microscope, and we were able to take the sample out and so forth.
Wow.
There were copper snakes. There were copper pendants. I mean, this was an amazingly huge find. So
how many? And the whole assemblage, Nick. How many artifacts are we talking about?
Counting pendants, non-legitimate artifacts. Gee whiz, over probably close to 30, 20.
Wow. So these guys are obviously, who's ever cranking these things out, they're
busy.
They're ambitious, right?
Oh yeah, no. This was, but I'm sure they worked it pretty quickly when you consider, and they probably had planned this for an awful long time.
Wow.
So I gave the presentation to everyone just so they knew and understood where I was coming from, but why I had these. I wanted to nip this in the bud before it got too beyond us in terms of the grapevine, and hopefully we did that.
Now, when you gave your presentation, you said you invited the people that brought you out there.
Yes.
Did you suspect then that they were directly involved, or did you think maybe they were being duped along with you? And how did you handle that during your presentation?
No, I kind of know who was involved, and
gotcha.
I have my suspicions. I had nothing I could prove in a court of law, by the way.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I went to the Attorney General's office to sign if I could prosecute, and basically they said we could tally up, my time and the resources and the people that were out there, and come up with a dollar figure and bring a lawsuit against them. But I had nothing. When those fingerprints failed, I had really nothing that would stand up in a court of law. So, I was just happy having them know that I knew.
Gotcha.
And knew this wasn't going to happen again.
So, Nick, the folks who were representatives from the native tribes, were they enthusiastic about the discovery? Were they suspicious? What was the reaction you got from the native folks who were looking at these artifacts?
Yeah.
There was like two schools. You could see some of them actually understood and agreed with our findings and could see what we, hopefully the science we did behind it. And others, there were others that wanted to believe that this was still legitimate. And I left it to them. I said, listen, if this is a legitimate site, sites do not exist only one. If this is a pattern, if this is some kind of ritualistic thing, there's going to be another one, and somebody else is going to find it. And when they find it, then maybe we can compare, and maybe I'm wrong. But until that day comes, we just have to sit and wait. And this is my conclusion at this point. That is, in fact, a hoax.
Right. Now, obviously people are hearing about this. Local media, how did they cover this story?
Actually, we didn't have any problems with media on the field when we were out there. It was, it was pretty remote, and not only that, it really didn't get that far.
Right.
However, later on, media were notified. Somebody notified them, and they came and interviewed me, and I showed them artifacts and discussed everything that I had, just as I did with the presentation, so that people would know what my belief was, and so forth. So, but we didn't have to deal with that in the field, which I'm very grateful.
Well, you were lucky that you were so far away that, for the most part, they're not going to want to hike a mile in to see an archaeological site in Connecticut.
Yeah, and I think at that point, the word hadn't gotten out.
Right.
So what did you do? I mean, as you started pulling this stuff out and you started becoming suspicious of who might be involved, and obviously we're not going to air those names for what should be obvious reasons, I would think. Right. What did you do with those individuals? Did you continue to let them keep working at the site, or did you politely ask them to leave?
No, this was our site. This was on state land. Nobody else was going to excavate there. In fact, we monitored.
Well, yeah, but were they working as volunteers, and did you then have to be like, sorry, you can't even sift dirt? Or, I mean...
No, for the most part, those that they were just observers.
Oh, okay.
Basically, we had our students and trained volunteers that did the work. The others, again, we had a number of people that were just out there to observe and get very excited every time we found something. But no, they were not involved in any of the excavating, and nor were they allowed later to go back to keep excavating. It was, and in fact, I made it clear that this was state land, and without a permit, anybody else doing any excavating out here would be prosecuted for that.
Yeah, and you have to remember as well that our, in Connecticut state forests, some of them are very large, proportional to a state. They are thickly forested. There are very few access roads, and we don't have like a large coterie of forest rangers. So that if you want to go down deep in the middle of Tungus State Forest or Enders or Peoples or Pachuag, and you want to muck around, you're going to be able to do that probably without anybody knowing. So planting these artifacts, that part of this would have been relatively easy to do without being observed.
Yeah, oh no, absolutely. That could have been done without any. So it brings us all back to what was the motive here.
Well, actually, before we do that, sorry, we're getting ready to go to break here in a couple, and I'll edit this out. But okay. Before we go to break, could you tell us about, because you keep mentioning the charcoal, and you've talked about some of the dating techniques you've used. Before we go to break, can you kind of just enlighten people who may not understand what the significance of that is? Can you kind of talk about why we use charcoal for one, why the charcoal dates were important, and you did mention the thermoluminescence date as well. So can you kind of just talk about those and why they were important?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do the TL. Kenny, you want to talk about the radiocarbon?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, sure.
The thermoluminescence when is usually done on ceramics, and so when the clay of the ceramic is fired in the oven, if you will, for to create its hardness and so forth, it is actually still, even after that firing, giving out heat, thermo, and light, luminescence. And physicists can actually measure the degree of heat and light coming off of that, and as a result, give a date to when that, in this case, a clay pipe was actually fired.
Right. In essence, by firing the ceramic, you are setting that thermoluminescence clock to zero. So you're getting rid of all the energy that's stored in there from before. So now it's at zero, and now it starts building back up. And if you know what the background radiation is, you know about how quickly that should build up. And then when you take that and effectively, fire it out again and get all the energy back off of it, say you can, using obviously complex mathematical equation, you can figure out about how long that must have been in the soil since it was fired. So when Nick tells you that something was that the TL date was 1,000 years, it means we're pretty confident that thing was fired 1,000 years ago, cooled off, and then it's been recapturing energy in the background in the soil since that time.
So it's not something like a carbon-14 date where it could get off if the material is too young.
Right. No. This is I don't know exactly what the range is for TL, but I think it's pretty broad. So in other words, as long as you've got a good handle on the background radiation in the soil where something is positioned, you can determine with some degree of accuracy how old something is.
Gotcha.
Now, in the case, in the case of the radio. Go ahead, Nick.
What I was just going to say about that pipe, and so there's no confusion, I think it's a legitimately old pipe that they somehow got their hands on, that where some of the other artifacts were actually modern made.
Gotcha.
I think the pipe is old, and that's why the TL date came back to 1,000 years ago.
There probably is a way to fake a TL date by taking an old artifact and then baking it. But you know what? The controls you would need to have. I'm not sure anybody outside of a nuclear facility could really figure that out.
Yeah, you'd have to have a pretty good grasp on that particular method of dating, and you were saying, like background radiation and all that. That sounds like something really difficult to fake.
That would be difficult to fake. And so the fact that pipe is real, the charcoal is real too. Right. But
charcoal is notorious for either being very helpful or very not helpful.
Right, exactly. I mean, I've got a site that I know is 3,000 years old. The first radiocarbon that we got out of the site was that it was recent, the last couple of 100 years, and it turns out that the charcoal we were dating was in fact from a historical charcoal kiln that got mixed in with the material from the site. So the deal here is that for those who are not familiar with radiocarbon dating, every living thing's got carbon in it. Everything is part of the carbon cycle. There is a certain very small percentage of this radioactive, unstable version of carbon. It's carbon-14. Most carbon is carbon-12. That's in the atmosphere. It gets respirated by trees. That carbon becomes part of trees or plants, and anything that eats the trees or plants incorporate C12 and C14 at the same proportion it is in the trees, same proportion it is in the atmosphere. So everything is in this kind of equilibrium. We all have, every living thing right now has the same, generally speaking, the same proportion of C14 to C12 in our bodies, in our limbs, in our fur, in our leaves, in our stems. But once something dies, it's no longer part of that cycle. So the C14, which has been decaying all along, is never replenished. It's got a half-life, 5,730 years. So essentially, if you take something that's in the ground, charcoal in the ground, you measure, you can determine precisely how much C14 would be in there if that were part of a living organism. You measure how much is in there, and if it's less than that, you know some time has passed. And what Nick is telling us here is that some of that charcoal is lacking C14 sufficient to indicate that it was part of a living thing 4,000 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or something in between. So very clearly in this case, that's real charcoal. That's old charcoal. Yep. The scary thing is they must have gotten it from somewhere and then planted it. They knew enough to plant old charcoal, which is kind of scary. They knew enough to do that.
But they didn't know enough to keep the date consistent, because the other thing that Nick mentioned was that the date range, even though the dirt from the different features were all stratigraphically the same age, the carbon dates were bouncing all over the place, which is not a normal thing at an archaeological site.
Maybe they just didn't have enough charcoal from one site, so they had charcoal from a bunch of sites that they already, had already dug up, and said, well, we'll just put the charcoal in. What they should have done, Nick, we should even be telling people this.
I was going to say, you sure you want to say this on air, Ken?
Yeah, no, maybe I don't want to say that. Well, this is something, when we come back from break, I have a very specific question I want to ask Nick about what the implications are of us talking about the mistakes that these people made.
All right, well, let's go to break real quick, and when we come back, let's hear the fascinating wrap-up to this, and keep giving advice to potential site fakers.
Yes. Hey, listen, we like to help people. That's
you can't fool archaeology.
This is Christopher Sims, host of the Go Dig a Hole podcast. It's a show geared for early career archaeologists where I bring interviews and casual panel discussions about the challenges and opportunities that many archaeologists encounter starting off. So, if you're still in school, thinking about going back, just getting started, or want to take the next step, you'll find what you need to go dig a hole. Tune in every other week on the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Stay cool and choose from over 40 in-stock ceiling fans for under $100, plus an 11% rebate at Menards. We carry the largest selection of in-stock Hunter ceiling fans, available in a variety of designs, finishes, and features. Create the perfect look and lighting for any room with a new Hunter ceiling fan. Visit Menards.com and view our entire selection of Hunter ceiling fans, plus the weekly flyer and other great deals going on now.
Save big money at Menards.
Save big money on pressure-treated lumber for your outdoor project at Menards. Menards has the best in-stock selection of AC2 pressure-treated lumber, decking, and fencing. All easy to load in our drive-through lumber yard. Choose from our huge inventory and build your project to last. Plus, you can get free estimates fast with our fence and deck design programs in-store or online at Menards.com.
Save big money at Menards.
And we are back, and we're still talking with Nick Bellantoni. And so wrap this up for us. What was?
Why the heck?
Yeah, why did this happen?
Well, Ken's done enough research in the frauds in archaeology. There's a number of reasons why people would do this. In the past we've seen things for frauds made for nationalistic reasons,
Right.
for profit, for fame. Nobody was going to make money on this because these artifacts belong to the state of Connecticut. They still are with the state of Connecticut.
So keep that in mind, people. Your fake artifacts
I
belong to the state.
Yeah, I think in this case, some individuals had an idea of promoting a copper culture in New England, that the copper culture started here and would eventually work its way to the Adena in the Ohio River Valley, to the Hopewell, to even Mississippian. And I think they had a belief that this all, Connecticut, or at least New England, was the source. And they were trying to get this theory legitimized by finding a site that would predate Adena, Hopewell, Mississippian, and thus have us as the source, the origin of the copper cultures in the New World.
Yeah. Nick, just let me interrupt for 1 second. I do not want to disappoint our listeners. So if you're expecting to hear this from me, you will hear it now. That is actually stupid.
Yeah, there's no.
And the reason is copper, native copper, raw copper, where you can find copper, is Michigan.
Yeah, there's no copper.
There's no copper in Connecticut.
How could there be a copper culture?
And it's even. And why would even anybody want to think that?
Ken,
blows my mind.
Ken, the reason there's no copper in Connecticut is because all of the Bronze Age people came from across the ocean and took all of Connecticut's copper away. That's why they were in Michigan at the end.
They were really, really super efficient at mining all the copper out of Connecticut. I didn't think that. Thank you for clearing that up for me.
I mean, that's kind of a dumb moment. It's why there's no gold in the world.
I believe was the motive behind it. A viewpoint of Native American history that they were trying to project, and a good archaeological site would be a way to do that.
So is that a common argument in the area, that the copper culture began in Connecticut and they were just trying to drum up some support for it, or was this kind of a fringy idea in general?
Well, I would think it's a fringy idea in general because, Ken says we don't find a great deal of copper here to certainly point to origins of.
Right.
But is it a popular
later?
Is it a popular fringe idea in the area?
People get an idea of the past, and in this case, I guess it just. They certainly believed it. They believed it, and I think they honestly believed it. They just. If we couldn't find a site, then they would create one to make us believe it.
But Nick, had you ever encountered this idea before?
No. Nope.
So it's not like this. So Sarah, I guess in general answer to your question, it's not like there was a general buzz out there in southern New England that there had been a copper culture here.
Right.
And that these guys were fulfilling that fantasy. This was their fantasy and their faith.
Okay, so this was just kind of a smaller fringe group within the larger fringe groups who were just trying to fabricate some evidence.
Yep.
Huh. That is so bizarre.
It's so bizarre. So now I want to make another correlation or another comparison here. When Brad Lepper, Jeff Gill talked about the New Akoli stones, and if you guys listening to the podcast, if you remember that they first find the stone that kind of looks like a pendant, right? And it's got
a pendulum.
Four Hebrew writing on all four sides. And when this was shown to Hebrew scholars, they all said, well, yeah, that's Hebrew, but it's completely ridiculous. That's the wrong kind of Hebrew. That's a modern Hebrew. It can't be. This is found in a burial mound that's a couple thousand years old. And so what was it, 6 weeks later or a couple of months later, just a few miles away, somebody finds a much better version of Hebrew on another artifact.
Right.
And even at the time, people say, well, when we're in this horrible position as scholars, when we debunk a fake, we are in fact providing additional information to anybody out there how to make a better one. And now, did it ever occur to you, Nick, while you're sitting there and you're talking to the press, talking to the media, and giving lectures, that when you are explaining the mistakes that these people made that immediately alerted you to the fact that something really fishy was going on, did it ever occur to you, did you feel kind of ambivalent about it, that, oh my God, am I just telling them how to do it better next time?
Not really, only because it's such a rare event in New England, but also, you know what? Ken, if we do our work right, if we do, all of the science, there's just no way they could, I've thought about it. Could I fake an archaeological site knowing what I know of archaeological science? And maybe I'm just not clever enough. I don't know, but I don't think I can. My colleagues are far too savvy and too smart to be fooled, even by someone who thinks they know what they're doing. And what they would look for. But how do you put something in the ground? How do you bury something without leaving evidence? And how, I don't know. I don't think I could do it. I really don't. I think my colleagues are much too sharp for that.
Yeah. I mean, and Sarah, I'm sure you've done more than enough test fitting and more than enough excavation of features. How do you can you conceive of a way of faking an archaeological feature so that somebody like you digging it wouldn't say immediately, there's something screwy about it?
I mean, if we're talking about, I was just thinking about this while you guys were talking. If we're talking a feature, like we've moved on to the phase 2 and then on to the phase 3, where we're actually taking out large chunks of the ground to look at the overall profile. No, that's really hard to do. I mean, our own shovel tests show up, and that's how we know they're shovel tests, because it's a giant column that goes straight down with nothing in it except this multicolored dirt. Right. If we're talking just an STP, just a series of STPs, yeah, you could potentially fake the initial presence of a site. But again, once you take it, assuming that it's even deemed worthy to go on to a phase 2 or phase 3, that's immediately going to go away. I mean, you could walk along and drop things serendipitously into people's dirt or in their backfill or even into their screens when they're not looking. But once you start digging that site, that quote unquote site, there's not going to be anything there.
But nobody's going to make any theories on test pits.
No, test pits don't change the world. They just start the process.
I think in the end, these people just didn't understand concepts of context.
Right.
They didn't understand how archaeologists truly work. Like you're saying, the soil profiles and the different things that we look at. And, and I think that all archaeologists, when they're working, should be a little suspicious about things because, and re-examining the context of finding things in to be sure that, this is the real deal. And I think they understood radiocarbon dates. They understood artifacts. But they did not understand the scrutiny of the science behind it, nor the context of soil that would be subjected to. So, and believe me, it's not because I'm the Sherlock Holmes to figure this out. This was pretty apparent. There was something great going on here that anybody with standard archaeological experience and knowledge would have figured out.
Well, I think it's interesting that their first mistake was not putting the fake features anywhere near where you were expecting. You, as a seasoned archaeologist, would have expected to find things. I mean, that would have been the first big red flag. Like, hey, here's these places all the way over here that have no relation to the actual site. You should go dig over there.
No, that's right. And they were trying to, what they were discussing, I remember, was, that's, under the ledge was the habitation. But this area was the sacred site. This is the ritual.
Yeah, but there was nothing pointing to that, so.
No.
Right. So, at least
it's important to point out that this is state land. Certainly excavating a site on state land without all the permission is illegal. But it's also illegal these folks who dug holes and planted artifacts.
Right.
They were breaking the law by doing
That's
that.
Right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, that
would have been part of the prosecution if we could have proved it.
Man, it's if only those fingerprints,
That would have been so cool.
Well, actually, I remember seeing something, I can't remember now if it was Arizona or New Mexico, where these looters, while they were looting a site, these assholes were smoking cigarettes and throwing the butts out. And in fact, those cigarette butts were recovered by the FBI, and they found fingerprints on them.
Nice.
And it led them directly to the people who they kind of knew were the looters in the area. And those guys went to prison. Those guys actually, along with paying a fine, they went to jail. Now, how long they stayed in jail, I don't know, but they actually were arrested on the basis of fingerprints. But those things hadn't been sitting in the ground for a while. They were just cigarette butts that they found. So this is a word of wisdom to site looters or site fabricators. Smoking is hazardous to your legal health, because if you throw a cigarette butt out, they're going to find them and they're going to be able to trace them to you.
You're going to leave clues.
Now, Nick, really and for true, how much did this cost? And that cost can be defined however you want to define it, to your office, where you could have been doing real archaeology, but you were obliged to follow up on this. How much did it cost you guys?
Well, I remember back then we were crunching those numbers, and I'm trying to remember now what those might have been. I think we were looking at anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000. I mean, I only spent 4 days in the field there, if I remember correctly. But there was a lot of analysis that went on beyond that. So, I think it was about $10,000 to $15,000 in the end, maybe closer to 20.
Wow.
And that's you don't have a huge budget. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of time. And radiocarbon dates, does those for free.
But yeah, we crunched those numbers. I remember when we were pursuing this, but I just can't. I don't remember now exactly what they were.
But still, no, we're not talking. It wasn't like $20 or $30. We're talking about thousands of dollars.
Absolutely.
Which makes this whole thing unconscionable. I guess because now listen, I'm not asking for any names or do you the folks who you believe, who you suspect, are they still involved in archaeology? Are they?
Oh no.
He says, "Oh no, no."
To be honest with you, they were never really involved in archaeology.
All right.
And we're not talking about amateur archaeologists or anything like this.
Sure.
These were individuals who had certain ideas about the past that they wanted others to accept. And these individuals were not archaeologists in any. And again, they did not do any excavating. They were just observers.
But that's this is really typical of the hoaxes we've talked about before on archaeological fantasies. That it's not always that somebody wants to make a ton of money. It's that they have some notion of some preferred view of the past. And God damn it, if the archaeologists won't find the stuff they think we should be finding, they'll kind of they'll prime the pump. And they probably thought that, well, once you find this, Nick, you'll be convinced to look for more, and you'll find the real stuff. And that's this weird perspective on the part of some archaeological hoaxers that, well, I know these sites are out there. They're not finding any, but if I make a fake one, that will encourage people to find more. And this is, Shinichi Fujimura in Japan. I want these sites to be older, so I'm going to put some fake ones in the ground.
Kenny, I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, that's exactly it. I think they were true believers. It just they needed we needed to be convinced by some physical evidence. But
it's such a strange form of logic, isn't it? That there's no real evidence to prove what I want, but if I make stuff up, that will lead to the discovery of real evidence. That's pathological thinking. I'm sorry. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, at least it wasn't a bunch of people who were just trying to get one up on him, though. I mean, that's what I thought going into this, but now that I know more about it, I was just like, if it's just somebody trying to pull a prank, that's kind of a really...
No, this was not a prank. These people were, I think they really truly believed, and it was just a matter of making others believe the same thing.
And now you are here to tell us, Nick, that since your discovery of these fake sites, we've got sites all over southern New England with copper and whale effigies. I haven't read about that in a journal. So.
Now that I'm retired, no one's finding any more sites.
So in other words, these books you're working on right now, Nick, you're not going to be blowing the lid off of the copper culture of Connecticut,
awesome.
right?
You guys keep having me back on this program, talking about vampires and hoaxes and so forth. I mean, people are going to say, what did this guy do for 30 years?
Well, Nick, come on. Everybody knows you're kind of a weird guy, so...
Well, you were the state archaeologist, I mean...
Yes, that's right. So, Nick, you said earlier, before we began taping, that you're involved in 2 book projects right now. And maybe you can just give us a hint about those, because maybe when those things are done, we can have you back.
Oh, we'd love to come back. You guys are fun to be with.
So what are the 2 books you're working on? If you can tell us.
The first one is called The Long Journeys Home. It concerns 2 repatriations of Native men that I was involved with. A Hawaiian by the name of Henry Opokahia and an Oglala Lakota Sioux by the name of Albert Afraidahawk. Long stories. They both died as young men here in Connecticut, and their families requested that their remains be brought back to their Henry to the Big Island of Hawaii, and Albert to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And I tell the stories, the history, the modern story, not only of the archaeology, but also the forensics and working with the contemporary families. And the second book is a fun one. It's tentatively called Houses of the Night, and it's the archaeology and forensics of Connecticut's historic tombs. One of my infamous, what I'm infamously known as, I've been in more historic tombs in New England than probably anyone. And so I'm going to be talking about 5 of my tomb projects in Connecticut with some of the most prominent families in Connecticut history. So it should be fun.
Are there any mummies involved?
No mummies, but we've got a couple of, a lot of skeleton remains, I suppose. But
any curses?
One Egyptian sarcophagus, if that can...
Oh, neat. That might be fun to talk about, actually.
Are you in that book, Nick? Are you going to be talking about Sarah? Years ago, Nick was called in for to investigate a tomb that had been broken into, and was it like some kids were looking for skulls for Satan worshiping or something?
No, we were involved with 2 tomb vandalisms like that. One in Indian Hill Cemetery in Middletown, and one at Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hartford. In both cases, individuals broke in because of satanic cult and Santeria ritual activities. They were looking for skulls for their and bones for their ritual activity, and we're involved in 2 criminal investigations with that.
This is
weird. So this is Sarah. Next Halloween. Next Halloween, you got to get Nick.
I like that we're already planning on the episodes that we're bringing you back on.
I'll tell you, my reputation.
There you go.
No, that would be kind of fun, actually, because that would be very modern. That's a very modern archaeological fantasy. There is the whole, the grave robbing and stuff. People don't realize that it still happens today.
Yeah, so it's just so strange.
Oh, yes. We've been involved in a number of cemetery vandalisms. In a couple of cases where people had dug into the graves, below ground graves of Revolutionary War and Civil War soldiers, because I'm assuming they think these individuals were buried with memorabilia, swords and uniforms, and they actually went into graves. I believe that was the motive, but cemeteries have been violated.
Well, Nick, I'd love to have you back.
Yeah.
Talk about.
We always enjoy being with you guys. You do a great job with this program.
And we've got some great ideas as to why we're bringing you back. So
very cool. Cool story, Nick. Thank you so much for sharing it. And Nick, I got this site in the Farmington Valley. Got a lot of copper and carvings of dinosaurs, actually. I think it's
Dinosaurs.
going to revolutionize archaeology.
The carvings of dinosaurs on the copper.
There
Right,
you go.
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ken, when you find the site, call me and for assistance. That's all.
Totally. Absolutely. Nick.
All right, Nick, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you later.
Yeah,
Guys,
thanks
thank
for
you
your time,
very
Nick. It's
much.
good talking to you. Have a good one.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. Raise your trials as one will call. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Thanks for listening. We hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Remember to rate and like us wherever you listen. Be sure to comment on this episode and share us with your friends. You can contact us with your questions, comments, or angry email at archifantasies@gmail.com or leave a comment on the show page. Show notes and downloads can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archifantasies. You can also follow the blog at archifantasies.com and follow us on Twitter at archifantasies. Music was provided by Archaeosuit Productions. This show is part of the Archaeology Podcast Network and is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle. Thanks again for listening.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. We don't do dinosaurs.
Two things here, Nick. I don't want you to say anything that will get you sued, but
Right.
even more important, I don't want you to say anything that will get me sued.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Save big money on pressure-treated lumber for your outdoor project at Menards. Menards has the best in-stock selection of AC2 pressure-treated lumber, decking, and fencing. All easy to load in our drive-through lumber yard. Choose from our huge inventory and build your project to last. Plus, you can get free estimates fast with our fence and deck design programs in-store or online at menards.com.
Save